I'm Glenn Lutz. I'm a professor here at Northwood University, and I'm director of Northwood University's Forum for Citizenship and Enterprise. This is an academic center which since 2009 has provided an ongoing series of programs relevant to our vocations in civic and business life. And I'll also be serving as our moderator tonight. I want to thank our co-sponsor, the Institute for Humane Studies, which is located in Arlington, Virginia. IHS advances a freer society by facilitating the development of students and scholars who share an interest in liberty. And we'll be hosting actually a statewide colloquium with IHS this Saturday, as we have in semesters past. If you have interest in IHS programming, please contact me and I'll be happy to assist you. If you look on the screen, you will see a mini URL for IHS. And if you want to put that in your phone, tablet, or computer now, you can then help them out with their survey. And it's important that they get your feedback on our program tonight. Now, you should have also gotten a paper survey, and Amber actually just walked in with more of those. So if you did not get one of those, please fill one of those out. We're going to draw a winner for a $25 gift card. But we want your feedback on this program as well internally. So if you can fill that out and give it to one of our student volunteers, that would be great. You can also leave them, for example, on the table in the very back of the auditorium here. All right, I want to let you know about some of our upcoming events. On November 5th, Kay Heimowitz, who is author of a book called Manning Up, and a fellow at the Manhattan Institute, will be lecturing here at 7 o'clock, November 5th, on the question, what's wrong with men? And if you look around campus after tonight, you'll see some flyers and posters for that. All right, on November 12th at 5:30 over in the Plaster Building, we're going to have what we call a coin flip debate, liberty or virtue, which is more important. And we call it a coin flip debate because our debaters, who will be here from 2 other colleges in Michigan, will actually have prepared for both sides of that debate. We'll flip a coin at the beginning, and they'll get whichever side they get when the coin flips. Again, that'll be in the Plaster Building, 5:30 on November 12th. And after that program, we're going to have a meeting for students who are interested in a book club or a film group to kind of talk about questions of politics and society and history and things like that. So if you're interested in that, please contact me. Let me, without further delay, then introduce our speakers and our format. On my left is Mr. Trevor Burrus. Trevor is a research fellow at the Cato Institute's Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies and the Center for the Study of Science. And as well, he's also a managing editor of the Cato Supreme Court Review. His academic work has appeared in journals such as the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, the New York University Journal of Law and Liberty, and the Syracuse Law Review, among others. His popular writing has appeared in national publications such as the Washington Post, the New York Times, and USA Today. He lectures regularly on behalf of the Federalist Society, IHS, and the Foundation for Economic Education, and you've also seen him, I'm sure, on major media outlets. He hosts a weekly podcast called Free Thoughts, which covers topics in libertarian theory, history, and philosophy. He's also author of 3 books on law and policy. He holds his Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy from the University of Colorado Boulder and his Juris Doctor from the University of Denver College of Law. And he will be speaking in favor of legalization. To my right, opposing legalization, is Kevin Sabet. Dr. Sabet has served as an advisor to 3 U.S. presidential administrations, both Democrat and Republican, having recently served as President Obama's drug control director. He also advises several NGOs and the United Nations working to reduce drug abuse and its consequences. His work has won international recognition and awards. Dr. Sabet is the director of the Drug Policy Institute at the University of Florida and an assistant professor in the College of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. He is co-founder of Project SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, and consults with numerous domestic and international organizations through his company, the Policy Solutions Lab. He published his first book, Reefer Sanity, 7 Great Myths About Marijuana, in 2013. He has been featured on the front page of the New York Times and virtually every major media publication and news channel on the subject of drug policy, and has contributed editorials to the Washington Post, New York Times, and Los Angeles Times. Among others, his op-eds have been recognized by The Atlantic and he also has a regular blog at the Huffington Post. He received his Doctor of Philosophy and Master of Science from Oxford University as a Marshall Scholar and earned his Bachelor of Arts with high honors in political science from the University of California, Berkeley. We'll begin our program with opening statements. Trevor will go first as our founding speaker, agreeing with the resolution. These will run 18 minutes. After a brief period of questions, we'll move to cross-examination. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. And then at that point, it's your turn. We have student volunteers who have 3x5 cards. And if you'd like to ask a question, get one of those cards, write down your question. Of course, you're welcome to tear a sheet out of your notebook if that's more convenient. Write down your question, and we'll collect those, and they'll come to me, the moderator, and I'll go through those and ask those as quickly as I can in the 15 minutes that we have allotted. Then we'll have 7 minutes for closing statements, and that will conclude our event. Downstairs, you're welcome to join us for a reception, which is sponsored by the America's Future Foundation, which is an organization that hosts timely dinner conversations among young professionals and alumni. If you want to learn more about them, you can look for them online or talk to Bryson, who will be hosting the reception downstairs. So, with that, let's bring up our first speaker, Mr. Trevor Burrus. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a great turnout. I smell a lot of extra credit in the room. No, actually, this is an incredibly interesting debate. And I'm really glad everyone came out for this. Thank you to Glenn for bringing me out. And thank you to Kevin that we've done this before. He's a very honest and a very engaging speaker. And what we're going to be disagreeing about is not as profound as you might think. I'm not going to come up here and just say, well, I will to some extent say that you have the right to do whatever you want with your own body. And I think that's incredibly important because let me ask you a question. Let's imagine that you knew someone who had a life-threatening disease, say stage 4 cancer, and with 6 months to go in their life, they decide they do not want to continue treatment in their cancer. Is it wrong to force them to continue treatment? Yes. Okay. So that's forcing someone, that's allowing someone to do great bodily harm to themselves. Now there's another person who wants to take a drug that will give them 6 months to live. Is it wrong to forcibly prevent them from taking that drug? I would argue that if you believe the first one, then you should probably believe the second one. But on the question of drugs more broadly, I just want to talk about who likes drugs here. Let's be honest. I want to start off by saying, first of all, that I do not like marijuana. I do not like drugs in general, except for some of the ones that we don't talk about very much. Obviously, nicotine. Obviously, caffeine. Who here is a caffeine addict? Come on, your college students. Okay, yeah. Actually, I see a bunch of truth and liars that I see here. Yeah. And of course, the most prominent drug of all, which is, of course, alcohol. This is the most used drug in the United States. It's also arguably the most dangerous drug used in the United States. In terms of 31% of highway accidents have alcohol as a contributing factor. Yet we deal with it. We deal with it in a variety of ways that are not returning to the age of prohibition, which is incredibly important. We deal with drunk driving campaigns, which was extremely successful in the 80s. We try and give people treatment. We deal with the drug because we believe it's worth it to have it legal. The debate that's going to happen between Kevin and I is basically whether or not it's worth it and what legalization should look like. There are other things that we prohibit from people too. We have like big soda bans and all the other things. Always thinking about when people are putting something into their own body and whether or not we should do it. So I want to talk about the 3 prongs of the drug war. This is historically the 3 prongs of the drug war. Why? Here's the fundamental question of the drug war. Why do heroin addicts or marijuana users get cages, and why do alcoholics get treatment? That's the fundamental question. Why did that happen? I argue it's 3 prongs. The first one is the perception of the drug. What does the drug do to you? In particular, does the drug make you, say, go completely insane or eat someone's face? Remember that instance, okay? Bath salts, man. By the way, that guy was not on bath salts at all. He was on marijuana, actually. You got a little bit of marijuana. So good. Thank you. Perception of the drug user. Who uses the drug? In particular, with regard to class and race and other indicators. Is it a hippie? Is it an African American? Is it a Mexican? And finally, the third prong is the dehumanization of the drug user. The only way we could possibly justify putting someone in a cage who does heroin and sending an alcoholic to AA is because we dehumanize drug users. And we do not take their pleasure into account when we talk about these drugs and their humanity. Usually we would weigh these things back against each other, right? We would say, okay, there's some harms to your brain, to your lungs from tobacco, from alcohol, and then there are some pleasures to marijuana too. And we weigh them back and forth between each other and see which one weighs out. This pleasure thing is a huge part of what Kevin and I are going to be debating. How much that pleasure is worth, and whether or not that pleasure is worth the costs that come with legalization. Because any proponent of legalization who comes up here and tells you that there are no costs to legalization is lying to you. There are, of course, costs to legalization, right? A free society is an assumption of the risk society. A free society means you let people behave in certain ways. You try and not encourage them to behave badly, but insofar as they want to play with their own brain and they want to, they're allowed to. I want to talk a little bit about how we got to this point with marijuana, how we got to the point that marijuana is illegal, right? How did we get to the point that we put marijuana addicts and users in jail? There's this man, Harry J. Anslinger, probably the most important person you've never heard of before in American history. The first chief of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics took that position in 1930. Harry Anslinger hated drug users, he hated alcohol users, he was a deeply racist man. He was the kind of man who was racist to people in 1930, right? It's like when people like this, like, man, that guy's really racist. You know you're really, really a racist. What did he think about various drugs? Well, you just think about some of them, right? So you can take drugs, we can be NPC, you can associate them in our past with the way they would associate opium, Asians, women going into opium dens and having their morals corrupted by this drug, especially if it were smoked. Marijuana, what did they think about marijuana? It's from the New York Times in the early 20s. A widow and her 4 children have been driven insane by eating the marijuana plant. The doctors who say that there's no hope of saving the children's life, that the mother will be insane for the rest of her life. Harry Anslinger deeply believed this about marijuana. He thought that's what it did to people. Remember the first prong of the drug war is perception of the drug. Second prong of the drug war is perception of the drug user. Here's a case that Harry Anslinger championed, a Latino man in Florida named Victor Licata, who for some reason he killed his family with an axe, and somehow the story came out that he was on marijuana. No one really knows why that story came out. It's very similar to the bath salt story, right? I just made the bath salts reference and everyone knew it. Somehow the story came out that the face-eating guy in Florida was on bath salts. That wasn't true. And somehow it came out that this guy was on marijuana. That wasn't true. This is how we got to the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, in which the word was explicitly changed from cannabis, in which people use that word all the time to talk about drugs. It was an ingredient in drugs that they were buying over the counter, to using the word marijuana, to specifically associated with Mexicans, and especially William Randolph Hearst, who was like the Fox News of his day, who owned about 40% of the newspapers in America. So what did Harry Anslinger think about these drugs? He said, most marijuana smokers are Negroes, Hispanics, jazz musicians, and entertainers. Their satanic music is driven by marijuana. Fair. And marijuana smoking by white women makes them want to cease sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and others. It is a drug that causes insanity, criminality, and death, the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face-to-face with the monster marijuana, he would drop dead of fright. 50% of violent crimes committed in districts occupied by Mexicans, Greeks, Turks, Filipinos, Spaniards, Latin Americans, and Negroes may be traced to the use of marijuana. The most, like I said, the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. Marijuana leads to pacifism and communist brainwashing. This is when he changed his mind, by the way. You guys, some of you noticed this? It's the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind that leads to pacifism and communism. By the Cold War, Harry Anslinger had decided that made you, meaning young people, all layabouts who wouldn't go fight against the communists and go fight for your country if the call came for the Cold War. So Harry Anslinger had a bunch of ideas. What did Richard Nixon think about the drug war? How did we get the drug war from Richard Nixon, who signed the Controlled Substances Act of 1970? Well, if you ever have a few free moments, I highly suggest listening to the Nixon tapes on YouTube. They're extremely entertaining. Nixon was basically Trump without Twitter. So I'll do a Nixon here, right? I see another thing in the news summary this morning about it. That's funny, this thing. Every one of them bastards are out there for legalizing marijuana is Jewish. What the Christ is the matter with the Jews, Bob? What's the matter with them? I suppose because most of them are psychiatrists. You see, homosexuality, dope, immorality, these are the enemies of strong society. That's why communists and the left-wingers are pushing this stuff. They're trying to destroy us. this question of how we got the drug war is extremely important. Because what we need to do is normalize drug use. We need to normalize how behaviors are acceptable when using certain drugs, which ones are not acceptable when using certain drugs, and understanding that your ability to alter your consciousness is yours. As much as putting a book into your head to change your mind, and putting a drug in your head to do the same thing is as much your right. What else do we see from the Nixon administration? Well, this one came out in the 90s from one of his advisors. You want to know what was really all about? Nixon had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate with hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. Did we know we were lying about drugs? Of course we did. I also want to point out a few things that are really about commissions that have studied marijuana before. So I always say in drug debates, discussions, that it was never the case that we asked a bunch of scientists to list all the most dangerous drugs from 1 to 20 and then made the top 20 illegal. If that were the case, we would have alcohol would not be legal. It was the case, however, that many times in history, large commissions and groups of scientists studied marijuana and came up with the conclusion that it should be regulated like alcohol or decriminalized entirely. And every single time it was essentially ignored by the governments. First one in the Indian Hemp Commission, 1894, 3,000 pages worrying about British soldiers in India, concluded that marijuana is not that harmful. Second, 1925, the Panama Canal Zone, a study of soldiers and whether or not they were smoking marijuana. Was it harmful? Not harmful. LaGuardia Report, 1944, a report commissioned by Mayor LaGuardia and challenged extensively by Harry Anslinger, who used his power over the AMA's prescription of opiates to get the AMA to condemn the report. The Wooten Report in England, 1968, concluded that marijuana should be regulated like alcohol, ignored. The Schaefer Commission, set up by the Controlled Substances Act, because marijuana was provisionally Scheduled 1 in the Controlled Substances Act. They were going to schedule it. Remember, it's important. Marijuana, as far as the federal government is concerned, is as dangerous as heroin. Cocaine is Schedule 2. Marijuana is Schedule 1. They were going to provisionally schedule it and had set up a commission to study it and decide whether or not it should be Schedule 1. Head by Raymond Schaefer, who himself was not a friend of drugs, they concluded that it should not be a Schedule 1 drug at the very least, ignored by Nixon for reasons already mentioned. And finally, in Canada, the Dane Commission, same exact conclusion. This has been studied over and over again every single time. I can add the fact that in 1986, the administrative law judge for the DEA, Francis L. Young, ruled that marijuana should not be a Schedule 1 drug after extensive hearings and essentially a trial, and that was overruled by the DEA. So what is Kevin going to talk about? Not to take to his thing. He's going to talk about the danger of this. And I don't disagree that this is something to be concerned with, but not overly concerned and that we're going to disregard the fact that people have a right to put something in their own body and then have the pleasure that comes from that. But the idea of commercialization, that there's going to be a big marijuana that is out there selling this stuff, is a huge concern for people on Kevin's side. For me, it is as much a concern as this. If you think that the world is better off because there are multiple brands of alcohol, multiple flavors, multiple ways to drink alcohol, if you think the world is better off on net that way, and if you do, and the way you do this calculus, by the way, is the subjective pleasure of people get when they drink alcohol is the biggest weight of this. Do you guys follow anyone economic students in this? What is the biggest harm to banning alcohol? People like alcohol. That's the biggest harm to banning alcohol. What's the biggest harm to banning hang gliding? People like hang gliding, right? What's the biggest harm to banning marijuana? The biggest cumulative harm is that people like smoking marijuana, and taking that away from them, increasing the cost, is not good sense and it's not good economics. We're going to talk about the costs and the question of whether or not, say there are about 10,000 people a year, I think this is probably die of automobile fatalities due to alcohol, about 10, yeah. We have decided that on some sense that's worth it. I mean, it's a really bad way of saying it. We try and watch our friends and say no, and say we're not going to have them drive drunk. But in some sense, we have decided that legalization of alcohol, those are worth it. And we try and do other things to mitigate those harms. We should do the same thing for marijuana. How much time have I got? 5 minutes. Oh, okay, cool. We talk a little bit about things like driving. It's a very interesting question when it comes to driving. We can talk about that risk too, but I'm not going to sit up here and tell you that there's no risk to driving while marijuana. I'm just going to tell you that if you think there's a risk of driving while drunk and you still think alcohol should be legal, then you should agree with my position. There's also a risk of driving while high and you shouldn't do it. We need to have a more mature conversation about how we're going to deal with marijuana. That's one thing that Kevin does that I applaud him for. People shouldn't be out there saying this is harmless. Just like when alcohol came up. When my mom grew up, she had these friends who would always come visit her parents' house. And every single time they left her parents' house in the middle of the night, they would fix them a gin and tonic for the road. It was called a roadie. They would want a roadie. That was the time, and we stopped doing that. So we can talk, that's a good development of society while not prohibiting alcohol. This one, though, this is a major study from National Highway Transportation Safety Administration that does not find a significant increase in the risk that marijuana gives to driving. Now, even that being said, whatever the increase is, we do not totally do this with alcohol in a similar way. So, for example, it is widely believed that having a blood alcohol level of 0.05 probably doubles your risks of having a car accident. But there aren't a bunch of people out there saying we need to lower the blood alcohol level to 0.05. Right? And so the question of how much risk we're going to deal with is incredibly important. We also can talk about how opioid use goes down. Now the case for marijuana legalization recreationally doesn't have much to do with the medical purposes. But it's worth pointing out if you have broad access to marijuana without having to go through a doctor, you can mitigate your pain. Not all types of pain, but you can mitigate your pain that's causing some of the opioid problems. I'll just give her the story. And of course, here's the biggest one. Do you prefer big marijuana or drug cartels? I mean, I'm fine. Big marijuana is a problem. But prohibition regimes and highly restrictive regimes, when people are wanting to use this drug, they create violence. That's the other flip side of this. It's not a vicious trade-off. You can have other choices in between prohibition and legalization, which Kevin will talk about. But remember, that's the flip side of this to some extent. And finally, of course, enforcement of marijuana is extremely racially biased. We have this even though the use rates are not racially biased, the enforcement rates are racially biased. So we've created an incarcerated class of young African-American men to a large extent due to this war on a substance you're allowed to put in your own body. And finally, we're still arresting people. Hundreds of thousands of people a year for marijuana possession. We're still charging them, they're still on parole, they're on probation, we're still doing it all the time. It's insanity to do this. How we're going to legalize requires a mature conversation, which I believe we continue today, but continuing prohibition or restrictions in the name of not letting people have a good time. And I'm just be honest, like having a good time is an important part of the world. Not letting people have a good time through broad commercialization is not going to produce, it's going to produce greater social benefits and let people have a good time than to restrict it more. And with that, I will turn it over to Ken.
Thank you so much, Trevor, and I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Glenn, thanks for putting this on. Can you all hear me okay? Great. You probably heard in the bio that I was at Berkeley undergrad, and there was a group we started there because a bunch of my friends at that time were misusing club drugs in the late 90s, ecstasy, MDMA. We started something called Citizens for a Drug-Free Berkeley. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. It was about as popular as the Coalition for a Wine-Free France. So I'm kind of used to that, but that's okay. Look, I don't disagree with everything that Trevor just said. As he said, I think there are some points of agreement, but I do think he set up the argument a little unfairly and wholly incorrect in a bunch of ways. First of all, there's this false dichotomy that we're choosing between locking people up versus basically commercial marijuana legalization. I don't think those are our only two choices. I don't want to be putting people behind bars for smoking marijuana. I don't think you should have a criminal record for doing it. I don't think you should have your life ruined as a result. But the idea that the only alternative to that is essentially allowing Philip Morris and the alcohol industry, which is exactly what's happening right now, take over the marijuana market, I think is also foolish. I think, and I'll talk more about that at the end, that we have better alternatives than this idea of prohibition or legalization. Of course, there are racist origins of most of our laws, by the way, but especially drug prohibition laws. That I'm not going to dispute. And I'm also not going to be up here telling you how harmful marijuana is, because frankly, you shouldn't take either of our words for it. You should do your own research, and that is not necessarily Wikipedia. Although the pot industry is editing the Wikipedia entries on marijuana about by the minute, and that's true. But don't forget about that. But you should read the National Academy of Sciences comprehensive report from 2016. You should read the UN World Health Organization report from 2017. You should read the Royal Institute of Psychiatry. It's fun to sort of look at the historical examples there, but I'm more interested in research from this century, these past decades that show the link between suicide, mental illness, and heavy marijuana use. I'm more interested in the IQ drop of 8 points among people who heavily use marijuana. 8 points, by the way, is half the standard deviation that takes you from as an average student to a below average student. I'm more interested in those studies and those comprehensive reports from every current medical association in the world agrees with it, with my perspective. I think that's an important note, but I think you all should do that research for yourself and see exactly what those folks say and why they're saying it, rather than take our word for it. And I'm also not here to tell you not to use drugs and not to use marijuana. I think you probably should avoid it, especially if you're under 25, your brain is still developing. We know that all drugs, and of course including alcohol, have a detrimental effect, especially on developing brain. But that isn't my purpose for this. My purpose today is to talk about why legalization, which in this country it's not legalization, let's be honest. It's commercialization, it's promotion, it's advertising, it's special interest lobbyists. I work for Republicans and Democrats, and the revolving door of special interests, whether it's pharma, and by the way, the head of Purdue, anybody ever heard of Purdue Pharma before, who created OxyContin? The person that created the sales plan for OxyContin resigned from Purdue a couple years ago. Guess what he's doing now? He's the head of a marijuana company. So if you don't think that the revolving door of special interests, that marijuana is somehow excluded from that, then you're missing the main point here. Because what we actually have now is not a choice between cartels or a special interest lobby, as Trevor set it up. We actually have a choice between, basically, do you want cartels and a special interest lobby? Because the cartels don't pack up, and they don't say, oh, you legalize marijuana here in Michigan, okay, we're out of here, we're done. That's not what happens. First of all, in Colorado and other legal states like Oregon, they're producing way more marijuana than they can legally sell. That we can actually measure now. And so they're producing 4 to 5 times more marijuana than they can even legally sell if every adult in the state used marijuana every day, which isn't what's happening. And so where is that going? It's leaking into the gray market, meaning sold, purchased legally, sold illegally, or mainly to the illicit market. Why? Because you undercut the legal price. You sell after hours. You don't need a license. You don't need to sell to people 21 and over. You don't pay taxes. So of course that black market is thriving. I wish it was between sort of, if we legalize, we get rid of those guys. The other reason we don't get rid of those guys is because they're not just dealing with marijuana. I mean, sophisticated drug cartels are actually transnational criminal organizations, and they're mainly dealing with human trafficking. It's human trafficking, then it's often other legal businesses. Do you know what Colombian drug lords, how they make the most of their money right now? Mining and logging. Illegal mining and logging. Now, mining and logging is legal, it's regulated. But because of the corruption in countries and because of the lack of trust in institutions, the illegal market for logging and mining is much bigger now than it ever has been. And that's how Colombian drug cartels are making most of their money. So we're not getting rid of cartels by legalizing pot, that's for sure. I think to even begin a dent, we would have to have a serious conversation, and I give Trevor sort of props for being honest philosophically about his belief to legalize all drugs, but we would have to have that conversation. Legalizing meth, crack, heroin, and we'd also have to have the conversation about virtually no age limits, because once you have age limits, you then have the illicit market. I obviously think that the costs of that, the public health and safety costs, are way too much to bear. I can't imagine how we can compare drug use, especially today's marijuana, which is much more potent than it ever has been, thanks to the industry that has created 99.9% shatter. I mean, that wasn't created by the drug cartels. That was created by good old American ingenuity. Pot gummy bears is not, Pablo Escobar's invention. It's the invention of, frankly, actually young white guys that look like me with Ivy League degrees that don't even use marijuana but know how to market it. And that's really what this is about. It's actually about corporate greed. It's actually about corporations, and they're the ones investing. It's not a surprise that Purdue Pharma, this guy, is into this. It's also not a surprise that Philip Morris is now one of the biggest investors in marijuana. It's also not a surprise that Constellation Brands, look them up, they're the biggest alcohol marketers in the world, have now invested billions of dollars in the Canadian marijuana market that just became legal 3 days ago. This is about one thing and one thing only, and that's a small number of guys that frankly look like me and have my pedigree that want to make a lot of money. And they will be the ones making money, by the way, not the kids that don't necessarily have my upbringing or pedigree. Those people are not going to get the $30 million loan that you need to start a pot business in a legal state. Those people do not know people of power that are going to get them those licenses. And the idea that making more drugs available is good for social justice, is good for the weakest in society, is laughable. First of all, alcohol, which is legal. And alcohol is not legal because it's good for you, by the way. No one said, if only more people drank, we'd be a better off society. No cop said, if more people drank in my community, we'd be safer. What parent ever said, if only my kid drank more, they'd be so much? We never said it. It's never said it. So why is alcohol legal? Not because it's good for you. It's legal really because of an accident of history. I mean, and we are stuck with it. I'm not in favor of alcohol prohibition, not because alcohol is not harmful, it's extremely harmful. I'm not in favor of it because 75% of us drink. Hard to prohibit something like that. And 75% of us have been drinking since before ancient Greece. So you can't turn that off with a law. Now, with marijuana, we're about around 10 to 12%. Let's say that's off by a lot. Let's say it's really 20% or more are regular weekly users, which would be way off national stats. But let's just say for argument's sake, it's still not the majority of people. It's still not something that we're sort of, I think, stuck with. And my thing is, if we can discourage more intoxicant use, that does matter. It's not hang gliding, folks. If you hang glide, I don't care. I hope you have a blast. I hope you hurt yourself. But you hang gliding doesn't put me in danger when I'm on the road with my kids. You hang gliding doesn't put me, out of pocket money when you might have to go to the hospital because of an accidental edible ingestion or a psychotic episode, which, by the way, happens about 700,000 times a year. You hang gliding is not equivalent to other safety and health harms when I'm your boss and you're coming to work an hour late every day because you're stoned. Your hang gliding doesn't have that same effect, so that analogy is totally wrong. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who uses marijuana comes to work late and is a dropout. I mean, I worked for 3 presidents. I think they all probably use marijuana. They used to say marijuana is a gateway. Is it a gateway drug or is it a gateway to the White House? I don't know. But the issue is, listen, plenty of people, and I'm not, so my point is saying that is I'm not saying everybody who uses pot is like, a dropout or a failure. Actually, plenty of successful people I'm sure do. Just like, how many people here have ever sped on the freeway? Now, there's a cop, so there's probably nobody will raise their hand. But we know probably most of us have gone over the speed limit before. I have. Most of us have forgotten to wear a seatbelt before. I have. Some of us have smoked and don't have lung cancer. Most people who go over the speed limit don't get into a car crash. Actually, most people who get into a car crash without a seatbelt live. Most smokers don't get lung cancer. Yet the association and connection of those two things, if you are doing those things, you increase the risk of those negative things happening. Absolutely. And with marijuana, it's the same thing. I'm not saying that everybody who uses is having a problem. It can't be a success. Is an abomination to society. Is having whatever Harry Anslinger was saying 100 years ago. What I'm saying is, we know that today's marijuana, which is a lot more potent, is a lot more powerful, is connected to a lot of things that, again, don't take my word for it. You need to listen to the AMA, the National Academy of Sciences, unbiased folks that don't have basically monetary interest in the marijuana industry. Because if you look at who's writing the initiatives, for example, who wrote the initiative you will be voting on in 15 days, you should see who wrote it. I mean, you should do your own research and see what companies they are connected to. You should see how they benefit the day after if it does pass. And you should also, by the way, read the fine print of the initiative. Because it's not about just decriminalizing pot. I'm all for that, by the way. I don't think people should go to prison. You want to grow your own and you're an adult and you smoke a joint and fall asleep on a Friday night, have a blast. After you hang glide maybe the next day. I'm for that. I don't care. But what I don't want to create is another multi-billion-dollar industry that, by the way, works alongside cartels. I can't tell you how many people in legal states are actually connected to the underground economy. They get licenses as a front. Of course, there's that. But in addition to that, these are people that, I live in New York City. They're on Wall Street. I see them every day. They are major investors. They're not in this because they love pot, because they're like, peace. It's so ironic that, Berkeley, which is the home of the free speech movement, anti-war movement, my alma mater I love and I'm very proud of, how ironic that as legalization is unfolding in California right now, let me tell you, none of those old hippies who I love to death and are still playing the same bongo song they were playing 20 years ago because they forgot the lyrics and don't even know when they started or ended, none of them are benefiting from pot legalization. I wish they were. I mean, they're really nice guys. But you know who's benefiting? The people that are benefiting, if you know the geography of California, they live an hour south. There's Sean Parker. It's major families invested in Silicon Valley. It's the people around Stanford. And I love to make a dig at my rival whenever I can. But it's those folks. It's those basically millionaires who want to get richer that are the ones profiting on this. They're writing the laws, and they're making sure they want to be they literally are saying, they're not even hiding it, that they want to be the Philip Morris of law. So that to me, we don't need another Philip Morris. Well, let's talk about cigarettes for a second. We have had tobacco in society for thousands of years, as you know. Do you know when we had lung cancer related to tobacco, when that started? It happened to start, and not coincidentally, when we had the tobacco industry for the first time in modern history 130 years ago. Why? Why did the tobacco industry take a relatively benign plant used by many civilizations, the tobacco leaf, for thousands of years without lung cancer, for thousands of years without emphysema, for thousands of years without birth defects? What happened? Well, the industry said, we have to figure out a way, forget this, hard to inhale and sort of annoying pipe stuff. We got to figure out a way to deliver this drug, because we think we can make it more addictive than ever, and market it. We got to figure out a way to do that en masse. So what did they do? Well, in the late 1800s, they invented the automatic cigarette making machine. And they invented the cigarette. Cigarette is a very new thing. It's a word that is very new in Western civilization. It seems like it would have been around forever. Not at all. It's only 130 years old. Why? Because they took nicotine, they added something, they took tobacco, they added something called nicotine, then they added ammonia and about 100 other things into it. They got British and Indian Turkish tobacco together, blended it together, had a sweet flavor, actually, and much sweeter than the old rough tobacco that you would put in a pipe before 1850. They put that into a easy to deliver, very marketable product. And then they hired doctors, their own scientists. Hell, they hired the American dream, a cowboy, the Marlboro Man. They convinced lawmakers that it was fine to smoke during pregnancy. Studies were inconclusive. We didn't have the research yet, they said. By the way, do you know when research we actually knew when cigarettes caused lung cancer? Do you have any idea what decade? The 1920s. When did the Surgeon General come out with a report? 1960s. When did we finally ban cigarettes in most places in public? 1990s. When did the tobacco industry admit finally that their product was addictive? About 10 years ago. And you can look at that. I would ask you to YouTube that and look at what the tobacco industry, under oath, all 8 of them, it's a classic drug policy history moment, when 8 of them were being questioned by now Senator from Oregon, Ron Wyden, who was a congressman then, and he asked them, do you think nicotine or your products are addictive? And this is in the 90s, they all said no, under oath. Philip Morris, Brown and Williams, and all the major companies. Folks, we are creating the modern version of that in front of our eyes. Marijuana in its natural state, cannabis in its natural plant state has low THC. It actually has a lot of what we call CBD and other components in it. Marijuana is a very complex plant. I happen to think that there are absolutely medical components to it. When's the last time, though, that you smoked a medicine? Doctor said, take a couple cigarettes of this and call me in the morning. It doesn't work like that, folks. By the way, when's the last time you voted on medicine? That's kind of weird to me, too. Or had something called a dispensary. We have medicines in a pharmacy that the scientific community has deemed are safe and effective, that it's not going to be snake oil, that you actually know what's in it. And there are components of marijuana that are medicinal, and I totally support those. In fact, I've called for more research. I absolutely think we should do more research on this one big area we would agree on. But that is so different than what the legalization movement is about. It's about money. It's about a small number of people making money with all of these new products, just like big tobacco, taking a relatively benign substance and turning it deadly. That is exactly, of course, what the marijuana industry is doing. They have to make their product more addictive. They only make money from heavy users. Did you know that? In alcohol, tobacco, any addictive substance, you do not make money from casual users. 15% of Americans, do you know how much alcohol we consume? 80%. Say that again, 15% of us consume 80% of the volume of alcohol in this country. That is the target market and audience for the alcohol industry, because that's how they make money. They don't make money from casual use. So I don't care if you smoke a joint once in a while. I mean, again, I hope you don't do the research. China and other countries that you're competing against, they absolutely love it. If you would get stoned all the time, they'll be a lot more competitive. But I really don't care. The issue isn't about your use, and that's not what this proposal in November is about at all either. It's about, do you want to create another for-profit industry? It's not decriminalization. It's full-on commercialization. In my last minute here, it was interesting. In Washington State, they voted for this 6 years ago, and they allowed gummies and candies and all of that. Well, after years of trying, the health lobby, like public health folks, they finally got them to pass a provision. They said no more gummy bears that look like candy to trick it. That decision was reversed within 48 hours, and because they had so much pressure from the pot industry, because that's how they make a lot of their money, is edibles. Smoking is not appealing to a lot of people anymore, so they got to do it through other ways. And they knew that if they lost the edibles, they would lose the market share. 48 hours of lobbying, that decision was reversed like this. You absolutely have edibles. So I don't see how there's the right way to legalize. Absolutely decriminalize. Don't put people in prison. Let's do research. But let's not create big tobacco 2.0. We've had 120 years of lies and deceit from them. Why would we would want to repeat that again? I think we'd be repeating foolishly our history. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's now the moderator's prerogative to ask a few questions, so I just want to follow up on a few things that our speakers have addressed. And then after that, we'll go to cross-examination. Each speaker will have 5 minutes to cross-examine the other. First question I want to ask both of you is, how much do we really know about marijuana use? And that is not only the effect on the body and mind, but also as public policy, some of the public health issues.
Start with you, Bill. Not enough right now for a variety of reasons, but we're learning more and more about marijuana's effects. For a very long time, there was a lot of suppression of research that happened via the federal government and the Schedule I drug. So if you are researching a Schedule I drug, you have to get a license from the DEA, so like LSD, for example. You can do that. You got to get a license from the DEA, and you're going to acquire the drug in some way. Same with marijuana. So that makes it very difficult for people to research it. And generally speaking, a lot of the research has been blocked for about 20 or 30 years if you wanted to research positive effects of marijuana. That changed starting in the 90s, but particularly between the 50s and the 70s and 80s. So we lost a bunch of research there. We need to do more research on a variety of things. I agree with Evan. I wouldn't advise 12-year-olds to smoke weed, or I wouldn't advise them to drink alcohol, but I think alcohol should be legal. And you probably know on the research side too.
Look, I mean, as someone who obviously is interested in research, we always say, every paper we write says more research is needed. So of course we should have more research. There is a bit of a misnomer though that because it's illegal you can't research it. It's not what Trevor said, but other people have said that. There's actually tens of thousands of peer-reviewed journal articles, both with U.S. and foreign research that has been published on this. The IQ study is very famous, that's from New Zealand. The psychosis and suicide study doesn't come from the U.S., it comes from a major institute in London by somebody who was just knighted actually for his service to science. We have a lot of research coming out of Israel that is looking both the positive benefits of the components of the plant. We have a lot of plants that have positive and negative benefits. Opium is a plant. If we didn't have morphine, we would have a major public health crisis on us. So we absolutely need the positive effects of opium. We obviously also know the negative effects, not just with prescription drugs, obviously heroin and other drugs that opium is derived from. So we have to do that research, but this idea, it kind of comes earlier that Trevor said that marijuana is treated like heroin is incorrect. Scheduling is not a harm index. It's very confusing, and it's frankly, I wish they would kind of redo it because it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But the reality is scheduling it doesn't mean that because both things are in the same schedule that they're equally looked at by the federal government in terms of harm. It means that they both fulfill the criteria that the government has created for these different schedules, and that's a key difference. It's kind of like saying in a grocery aisle, in the snack aisle, you might have Lay's potato chips in the snack aisle, but you also might have, like, you know, unroasted, unsalted almonds. They're obviously very different. I mean, almonds are probably better for you for most people than Lay's potato chips, but they're both snacks. So you wouldn't say, well, we treat these two snacks are the same. No, they're just classified as the same thing by that supermarket. The government does not think that marijuana is more harmful or is as harmful as heroin. If you have a heroin trafficking, you're going to get a 50-year mandatory minimum sentence. There are plenty of people in prison for trafficking large amounts of heroin and even possessing small amounts of heroin. There are very few people in prison for having a joint in their pocket or even medium sort of sales. So those things are treated from an enforcement standpoint very, very differently. It just happens to be in this kind of clumsy schedule. We would agree, though, there should be more research on it. We could make that research easier to do. I think we should. I think we would agree on that. But frankly, there's been a lot of research from around the world in 50, 60 years that have illuminated the picture of what we are.
I just wanted, it was the case, the changes that Kevin mentioned about severity of punishment. Before the change in marijuana began happening, since the 90s, marijuana used to be punished extremely severely.
Individual users with a joint in their pocket in prison.
Absolutely. And the federal, I mean, the Boggs Act 1951, but 2 to 4 years mandatory minimum for possession of 1 or 2 joints. I mean, that's the 50s.
Now, correct.
Yeah. So if that's the case, that at one point they did regard it as like, you know.
So consensus is you'd like to see more research on body and mind effect. On the policy, how much do we really know about policy? How many case studies we have in Colorado? What else do we know?
I'll take policy first. And then, I mean, look, it's new, but we're not going to know the effects of policy. Anyone who thinks that kind of like, we know with Colorado it's like an A or an F. No, we don't. It's going to take over 20 years to learn the full picture of what happens. We have early indications in these states. I tend to think that they don't look good. One thing I should have mentioned, I know you pay more car insurance than anyone in the country. Colorado's seen about a 35% increase in car insurance. By the way, another example of corporations benefiting from this. They have excuses now to raise the premium because of riskier driving. We have to wait and see about the rest of it. One thing I will say about the policy that's been extremely frustrating from a research point of view is now that you have the state defending legalization, like it's their job to regulate marijuana, I'll tell you how difficult it's been, we haven't talked about it before, how difficult it's been to get actual numbers out of the state, even when you do Freedom of Information Act requests, because the state is very worried that they will look back, like as if the governor will be to blame in the next, election or whatever if there's bad numbers. It's been so hard to get numbers like what are the dropout rates related to marijuana, what are the treatment entry rates related to marijuana. Even the driving studies, we've had to pull teeth to even get very basic numbers, and I think it's because you now have a government that frankly is being lobbied by the special interests. Half the people in Colorado who regulated marijuana have quit and now work for the pot industry. So it's very, very hard, I think, to get those numbers.
I agree with a lot of what Kevin said in terms of when we'll know. It's not, it happened too quickly, but I also want to point out the fact that for a very long time, I mean, since 1937, federally at least, but for older than that for some states, we've treated marijuana as if it was a very severe drug, and we did not develop a culture around marijuana, how to be responsible users and sales, how to responsibly sell it, where it should be consumed. That culture developed underground, where it developed. And so part of the things that regulate how you use drug use is not just the laws, but the development of social institutions and social mores that sort of constrain your behavior. And that's what we will also see in the decades after Colorado. 20 years from now, we'll know more about the driving ring, but we'll also see more social development of how marijuana is to be treated, which we haven't seen for a very long time. And that has many countervailing effects.
Good. Okay, now we move to cross-examination. Trevor, you get to ask Kevin questions. You have 5 minutes, and then Kevin and Trevor 5 minutes.
We asked 5 minutes of questions.
Just like we should.
Yeah,
I got 74.
Yeah, exactly.
Right now. Profit. So it's interesting that your tax on profit which I know is it's a good sales line, because people have a problem with big business and profit, but only some big businesses and some properties, right? So Amazon, maybe they are a little bit on the downside, but you have, Apple, right? And so you can do the same thing. They're making billions and billions of dollars off of people. And the question is, does Apple add to, and of course they're on the regulatory side, like any company, basically has to be if it's going to be regulated. So would we say that Apple added to net happiness in the world? And I think the way we would calculate that is we would say, basically actually the way we calculate it is, everyone here who owns an iPod, an Apple product of any sort, the amount you would pay versus the amount you did pay, that difference. So let's say you would have paid $2,000 for your iPhone, but you paid $1,000 for it, you have $1,000 of happiness. That's how much Apple gave you for their profit. If we did that with marijuana, so I mean, I challenge your use of profit without saying that the underlying use is problematic, right? It's okay to make profit off of making people happy.
Well, it's like you asked my wife that $1,000 of happiness, she's a net loser. She'd say, I'm on my phone all the time. She's actually losing on that because we're using our phones too much. So it would probably prove my point. I mean, look, obviously, an Apple product can be addictive, no doubt about it. It could actually cause car crashes. We're texting and driving too. So in those ways, it's similar. But I think there is something qualitatively different from, between that and a mind-altering substance, an intoxicating substance, something that changes behavior and can lead to many more negative externalities than using an Apple product. So I think those two things are different. Obviously, I'm not necessarily making a value judgment about profit. Profit is what it is, it's profit. My point is, we at least should know what this is about. I mean, whether you think it's great. Some people have said, Kevin, that's capitalism at its best. That's great. I hope maybe you would say this, I hope there are people making billions off that. I don't care if it's 2 white guys or 20 Hispanic guys or 3, whoever it is, it's great that people are making money from it. Fair enough. I would actually argue that when it comes to addictive products, it's not great when people are making money from it, because that is putting their private profit over the public good, over the public health. So a few people might be pocketing some money, absolutely they are, but that is putting public health and so many things, whether it's workforce safety, whether it's your insurance premiums, whether it's car safety, whether it's mental illness, psychosis, schizophrenia, suicide, all of those negative externalities outweigh the good. Of course, people derive pleasure from using marijuana. They derive pleasure from using heroin. In fact, they derive much more pleasure, according to the way we've been able to measure it in the body, for heroin, that's why it's more addictive than any other drug, than they would marijuana. Not a reason to say, well, that gave me $5,000 worth of pleasure, and then therefore that's going to be countered in a good way by, or not in a bad way, I should say, by any of the negative externalities. So I think that the negative externalities of marijuana are so great that $1,000 extra of pleasure is really putting public health and safety at risk.
Yeah, I mean, you said one question. So.
No, you go.
Oh, I still have 2 minutes.
Right,
So,
you could ask that.
I mean,
Just don't fill it.
again, I find that it's the public good you just seem to define as something different than the good experienced by the public. I mean, you said putting it against the public good, but if a lot of people go out there and sort of say, I enjoy doing this drug. Do you believe that the benefit of alcohol being legal outweighs the cost? And how would you answer that question?
Yeah, well, the way I would answer that is I'm not saying that nobody is deriving pleasure from using drugs, including marijuana, and that is a positive thing. It's a positive thing. What I'm saying is, though, there's a whole taxonomy of harms and benefits, and I happen to believe, and you happen to believe the opposite, that the harms, as great as they are now, especially as we know the way marijuana is linked to other drug use, all the things that we've been talking about, and I've been talking about, I think outweighs the positive that a few people might get. I actually also think you can have your cake and eat it too. If you're somebody who really enjoys pot and you can kind of do it and you're fine and you're not getting people in trouble and you're not getting arrested for DUI and all that, I don't want to encourage you to use it. You might want to, I don't want to encourage you, but I'm also, and you don't good. But I don't want to say, I don't, but at the same time, I could say, well, you could do that, but you don't need to create a commercial, legal, for-profit market that normalizes, promotes, advertises, has special interests on every state capital. You want to use it, you can do it. Most people who use drugs, by the way, don't get in trouble with them. By the way, that's all drugs. And I'm saying this as someone who's very anti-drug. When I look at the data, most people who use any drug, they don't like it. They use it once, twice, or 3 times, and they stop using it. So I know that most people won't have a problem with it, and it won't be against the public good. I think the smaller proportion of people that do have a problem, though, that harm outweighs.
You think you're punishing a lot of people for a small.
I don't want to punish them, I'm just saying we're not going to have.
Preventing them from enjoying themselves.
They can enjoy it. I'm not saying I want to put them in prison. They can enjoy it as much as they want. But I don't want them to put a pot shop on the corner. I don't want them to turn it into Philip Morris. And I don't want them to have, I don't necessarily think we need pot gummy bears.
Kevin, your turn.
Okay. My question would be on this issue of the underground market and the black market. On the one hand, basically, where do you put the limit on legalization, right? Because legalization implies regulation. So I don't think it would regulate it. Folks say we should regulate this, put an age limit, put the, let's put a cap on the THC, although they've never ever proposed that. I wish they would, but they don't. But they try and put regulations around it. What would be your ideal regulations? And then I have a follow-up question. Like, so when I say that, I mean like age limit, product.
Yeah, so the interesting thing is, I think you have to, my answer to this would be different in different contexts. We were discussing at dinner about Europe versus alcohol consumption in Europe versus the United States, right? So you have a question of culture and drinking that developed in Europe, which helped sort of moderate the use of alcohol. I think that having a drinking age where it is crazy. I think the way we send kids to college and have the drinking and stuff help encourage a type of harmful alcohol use, right? So one of these things that I would do, so when you're rolling out marijuana legalization and you don't have your systems in place, I think the very beginning we can do things like have an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old age limit for that. I would encourage people not to do it, but they're also adults, and I do believe that if someone can go and be conscripted by their government, but they can't smoke a joint, that that's deserved. So that kind of pairs it up with other things that we allow adults to do. In terms of regulation of THC content, I would not have regulation. I would probably just have regulations for what actually is going on with THC. What other
How about like corporate spending limits for the marijuana industry in terms of their political influence, or in terms of basically any regulations on the
Well, now you're getting into another
Yeah.
specialty of mine, which is candidate and finance. So the corporations cannot give to candidates. They would be allowed to run ads if they want to, because that's just trying to.
What about advertising?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, advertising is much portrayed as much more harmful by people in the public health and on the left in particular as basically a form of mind control, which it usually isn't, because if you think about how many products fail when they try to put these things together, it's a huge problem, right? New Coke. There was not enough money that Coke had to make that a winning success. Corporations are trying to figure out what you want, doing much less of making you buy them.
And then finally, how does your logic not just translate, or does it, if you tell us to other drugs? Because I think everything you said, you could just substitute crack cocaine, meth, heroin, and does it apply the same way to
All drugs should be legal. But this is important, that what legalization means is very different. It's something that you know very different. Alcohol is not just legal, right? Like, not anyone can make alcohol, not anyone can sell alcohol, not anyone can transport alcohol, not anyone can buy alcohol, right? Like, after this is over, we can go down to the state authorized drug dealer and do some state authorized drugs together, right? Otherwise known as the bar. And there's a variety of ways that drugs can be legal that does not require just either banner ads or not. Okay? And I don't think marijuana is as harmful as you do, or as addictive.
Well, I have 2 minutes.
Oh yeah, you have. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, so you don't think marijuana is addictive?
I think you're using the word addictive in a way that is.
Have it for me. Withdrawal.
It's but these understand that there's a difference between the addiction of nicotine and a difference between the addiction and what was called cannabis use disorder, which I think you would agree with, right? Like, the withdrawals that you get from not using cannabis are called psychological. This all gets very into the DSM and all the different definitions.
There is DSM criteria.
I know, yeah. But I mean, on the very basic level, I think comparing marijuana to cigarettes as someone who is addicted to nicotine and as like vaping instead of like that. I think that is just a very different category of addiction. And you can say that they could try to make you addicted, but again, that maybe they'll try to.
I had someone tell me the other day, marijuana is not addictive. I said, how do you know it's not addictive? He said, I know because I use it every single day. So there's a lot of knowledge.
Okay, so we have two things yet to do. It's your turn. We have student volunteers who have 3x5 cards. They're going to identify themselves. We have one here, we have one there, we have Dr. Trevor, Amber. If you want to ask a question, again, you can write it down on that sheet of paper, give it to one of those 4 students, or just bring it up to me. You can also use your 3x5 card. And we're going to take just a little time to write those down and collect those. We'll do that. Then we'll move to the final presentation. I'm still going through questions, but I've got enough good ones. We can go ahead and get started. And Trevor and Kevin have agreed not to filibuster, so they're going to speak to these things as tersely as they can, and I'm going to keep powering through these questions. Lots of great questions. I apologize, we just won't be able to do them all, but we'll do as many as we can, and as they both said, I encourage you to do more research. First question, can you both speak to the economic costs and benefits of legalization, including taxation?
Well, obviously, there's never been a comprehensive economic sort of evaluation of it. We've tried to do it. If you go to our website, learnaboutSAM.org, we've looked at a couple different states. It's very hard to quantify a lot of the costs. How do you quantify a mental illness that maybe partially be responsible for marijuana that triggered it or partially not? How do you quantify school dropout that may partially have to do with it or partially not? It's very tough. But one thing I will say is when you look at alcohol and tobacco, because it's a great question about tax revenue. For every dollar in alcohol and tobacco revenue, it costs society $10 to $15 in lost social costs. We don't make money from those things. We don't pay for our schools with alcohol money. We can't even offer free treatment to people who need it, who are addicted to alcohol or tobacco, with that tax money, let alone pay for roads, schools, and all the other things that folks are promising with marijuana. So I don't know what the exact ratio is going to be. I absolutely think it's a money loser if you add up the social costs of productivity and all those other issues I mentioned earlier.
I just want to add that it's important to figure out what to have a good definition of what is an economic cost. I don't personally believe that, say, loss of productivity is a valid economic cost, but that's true. The Halo games and my time on Xbox and like really have a social cost problem to me because you really have to believe I do not owe the world my brain or my time, and so those are I don't regard those as an economic cost.
Okay, second question. Would you please speak to advertising, whether you think any particular advertising would be or should be off limits, and also related to that, the effect of legalization on underage users?
I'd have to get more specific. I can't think of any type of advertising I think would be off limits at this point. The idea that, say, Joe Camel made children smoke, it seems like it's true, but hard to find actual studies that show that's the case. Yeah, without specific examples, I can't really think of any limits for advertising. I don't think advertisements are mind control. So, when it comes to youth rates, it's a little bit debated. We have some of them seem to go down from the national average in some states. So there's been some new studies that show they've gone up in some states, where Colorado's youth rate was a little bit below the national average and lower than it did in 2012, but there's some new papers, so you probably can speak to that.
Well, I mean, surprised this is where we would differ. I mean, I would want to see advertising restrictions. Good luck, though, getting them through. We have this pesky, important little thing called the First Amendment. And commercial speech is free speech, has been pretty much deemed. And the only reason you don't see cigarette ads today is not because of our wonderful lawmakers who found a loophole in the First Amendment. It's because the tobacco industry was basically shamed into voluntarily taking them off when we found out they were lying to us for 130 years. It's a voluntary ban. That can be reversed at any time. It is very difficult to enforce advertising bans. I absolutely think there should be advertising bans. I don't think we should be promoting this in the same way we do other substances that are proven harmful as well. But I think it's very difficult to implement. That's why I think a good legalization law is an oxymoron, because we're not going to be able to limit this given the influence of the industry. They're way too powerful. They give too many politicians too much money. I mean, how did John Boehner go from the leader of the Republican Party? He wanted to throw everybody in prison. He blocked every single criminal justice reform when I was in the Obama administration that we wanted to implement to not put people in prison for 20 years to have crack. He blocked all of them. Now and I won't use profanity, leaves Congress, and a year later he's a spokesman for the marijuana industry because he's getting paid $100,000 a speech. Yes, that's the good old American capitalism. That's toxic to public health. I don't think that makes any sense, and I think things like that should absolutely be limited.
What if he was a spokesman for wind energy?
Well, I don't know what his
Is it just him being a spokesman for anything that's
I don't know what his record
or
on
just
wind energy.
marijuana?
Well, no, obviously, I'm interested in this issue, so I don't know what his issue on wind energy. If he was against wind energy, and then all of a sudden, because he got paid millions of dollars, became in favor of it, and wanted us to believe that he was incredible, that we could, believe his words of wind energy, I think that's too hard of a pill to swallow. I think it's very hard to believe those people's words on that. And the issue of youth use, we've actually seen that the biggest increase in youth has been between not 12 and 13-year-olds, but actually like 15, 16 to 25, 26. And a lot of people think, well, we don't care about that. Over 18, we don't care. Well, we do, because your brain is developing until about age 25 or even up to 30. Us guys develop a few years later than you ladies. Surprise, surprise, right, ladies? We take a little bit longer. But the issue is, I think that is worrisome. I think that's something we need to look at.
You also shouldn't be a boxer when you're a teenager, but I wouldn't make it illegal.
Okay, next question. Can you please distinguish between decriminalizing and legalizing? In other words, what would it look like to decriminalize but not legalize? And related to that too, there's a lot of questions about medical use. So if you could speak briefly to the difference between CBD and THC. Is there a way, for example, to make CBD readily available without the THC component?
So decriminalization is removing the criminal penalties of use, or even maybe growing your own, but then keeping outlawed the sales. So you wouldn't be able to promote it, sell it in an open license store, pay taxes on it or whatever. You wouldn't have that. But decriminalization would be allowing, again, removing criminal penalties for use. Maybe something like a light speeding ticket, if you get caught in public doing it, maybe something like a pedestrian jaywalking ticket or whatnot. It's very different. On medical, as I said earlier, the marijuana plant is very complex. There's hundreds of components, most of which we don't even know what they do. A few of them we do know, and one of them, CBD, that was just mentioned, does not get you high, cannabidiol. It works on different receptors in the brain and body. I'm not going to go into the detail of that, but it works differently than THC, which is the ingredient that binds to a bunch of your brain receptors, judgment, memory, cognition, all kinds of things, motor skills. CBD doesn't do that. It binds to different receptors, and we think it's helpful for some very rare epilepsies that don't respond to traditional medication. It could be helpful for things related to multiple sclerosis. We're still researching it. Today, there's a CBD drug available at a pharmacy, covered by insurance, that you're able to get legally. You will not run afoul of federal law if you get prescribed it. It's called Epidiolex, or cannabidiol is the generic and name of it. And it's fully legal. I think that's great. I think if your doctor prescribes something medically appropriate, we prescribe way more harmful things than things like cannabidiol. That's fine. But we shouldn't, what bothers me is when I talk in debates about legalization, and then somebody says, well, you should legalize it because I need it for my whatever ailment. That's mixing two things. That's mixing the medical and the recreational. I think we should keep them separate, just like we do opium. We have recreational opium, it's called heroin, and we have medical opium, it's called morphine and other things. Both dangerous, by the way, especially if misused, obviously, morphine, but it's different.
CBD has incredible potential. I know of very few side effects. It should be, has extreme potential for neurogenesis, to regrow brain cells. It's one of the reasons why marijuana is a very complex regimen when you smoke it. And I think it should be available over the counter, but it's a complex legal situation.
The issue is, the only issue I would have is over the counter, because in principle, I might agree with that, although we do not have long-term studies. So, but listen, if you're willing to take the risk and you don't care about 20-year studies, fine. Big issue for me is not that. Yeah, the big issue for me is the fact that a lot of people sell things called CBD now online, Amazon, everywhere, in stores. You have no idea what's in those substances. You do not know if there's CBD in them. You do not know if there's a lot, most of the time there's a lot of THC in them. When the FDA has ever cared to test them, which is very, very rare, 2 years ago, they tested 20 CBD products, and none of them had the advertised CBD. So sort of buyer beware. I'm guessing you would say the market will figure that out. I don't know. I think the FDA should say.
Well, it's more of an FTC thing, but yeah, it's a thriving market where you can have information exchange and guarantees. You can't get it. It's not immediate.
What can employers look forward to? What have we learned from other case studies on legalization?
You mean like alcohol?
Employers.
When you said case studies of legalization.
Other cases of legalization.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that I think I've been clear that I think that there are harms that come from marijuana legalization, but they're outweighed by the benefits. But so some of these you can figure out how to deal with them through other methods other than prohibition. Prohibition is a very coarse way of dealing with problems like drunk driving or drug driving, or people coming to work still. So this has been true in alcohol for a very long time. How do employers deal with their policies of dealing with people coming to work drunk or not? And there's a variety of ways of doing it. And just like, and that's what you're seeing throughout the state of Oregon, there are a bunch of people using different methods of screening their employees.
So I
But
think
it's
that
difficult to screen employees, right?
it is difficult to screen employees. THC is very different than alcohol, the way that it metabolizes in your body. You are intoxicated far longer with THC, even if you don't realize it. It stays in your fat cells, unlike alcohol, in and out of your system in 24 hours. The testing is very difficult to do. I think employers in the states that have done it, one big thing is labor shortages. We already have a massive labor shortage in this country, thanks to record unemployment, I guess. But the issue is finding people who can pass a drug test as working on a construction site, or as a truck driver, as a pilot, as a nuclear handler, has become really hard. In fact, the biggest construction company in Colorado now hires out of state because they can't find someone who can pass a drug test. It reminded me of going to Appalachia in 2009 with the White House when there was a massive, you remember, the major recession of 2009. Everybody wanted a job, unemployment was rising. They couldn't find people to hire in the mines in Appalachia who could pass a drug test because of the OxyContin problem. Purdue Pharma targeted poor white Appalachian folks to begin with. And that's how that was going. So I worry about labor shortages. I worry about employers' rights and employee safety, your fellow employee when you're working at a factory. I worry about, frankly, this is going to be really good for trial lawyers. Any trial lawyers in here, or insurance company owners, you will benefit greatly. There's a ton of losses with regards to liability. Hey, I slipped on your wet floor, boss, and you owe me now for 10 years. Boss says, wait a minute, you just tested sky high for marijuana. Well, actually, you can't. They'll say, well, you can't prove that I was recently using, et cetera, et cetera. These kinds of cases are a big deal in lower courts. That this has been a huge problem. I think employers and the workplace loses big time.
Yeah, I just want to point, I mean, Ken brought it up, but it depends on your employment practices. So it is true. So if you have a business where you say, I don't want to employ anyone who failed a drug test with 3 weeks ago, they smoked weed, right? And most businesses would say if you go home and drink alcohol, they're not going to let you come back in the next day. So similar, if you smoke pot on the weekends, you would fail the drug test. But businesses need to figure out a way of dealing with that. In the sense that they're not always stoned all the time. It's just you could have smoked pot a month ago and still fail a drug test. So that's their practice.
Few people will fail a drug test if you literally did no marijuana in 30 days. That's a very rare case. It can happen.
2 weeks.
But yeah, 2 weeks. But the issue is these are very different substances than each other. Alcohol, we like to compare them. It's like they're both intoxicating and one's legal. They're very, very different in the body and to the developing brain, by the way. Alcohol does not affect actually many parts of the developing brain and what might be needed for a safe workforce. It does affect in some ways, of course, a safe workforce, but I think it's a little bit apples and oranges. I do want to touch on one issue that you brought up also about prohibition. You've heard me, I've said I don't want to lock people up. I'm in favor of criminal justice reform. All that's true, but there is a fundamental truth with this word prohibition that gets trashed a lot. And I just want to say one for that is there's a reason why 70% of people drink, 30% of us still use a tobacco product, and less than 10% of us in the country, 12 and older, has used an illegal drug in the last year. There are a lot of reasons, but one big reason is the law. It doesn't deter everybody. Obviously, people are always going to use substances, but when something is legalized and therefore normalized and therefore promoted and pushed by an industry, but even forget that, just normalized and allowed, you're going to have more use of it. The reason cigarettes have gone down among youth and among a lot of people is because we've actually made it a lot harder to smoke cigarettes. We have stigmatized smokers. And I'm not saying we should stigmatize marijuana users because I think people need to get treatment. I don't think they should be stigmatized as drug users. We don't want to increase denial. That's a huge problem with addiction. But the issue is when the act is stigmatized, it is harder to do when fewer people do it. So that I get that we don't want to like have a war on drugs. I don't either. I don't want to put people in prison. It's been disproportionately effective. But the issue is there is something to say when something is legal, allowed, and a stamp of approval by society. Not even a stamp of approval, a badge of adulthood. I mean, alcohol is a badge of adulthood if you're a teenager. It is, you are now an adult, you are drinking. I don't think that that is something that's necessarily beneficial for all the other drugs.
Can you guys speak to arrest rates and incarceration? Are people still being arrested in Colorado for marijuana-related sales?
Those related, yeah. More kids, probably related. I mean, the simple possession, of course, those arrests are down. These different ways that you still have age limits, you still have other regulations to deal with them. So there are things around there.
More Black and Hispanic kids were arrested last year for pot in Colorado than before legalization.
You're talking about for under 20.
Under
I don't
20,
know.
youth. Why? Because it's illegal if you're underage. It's certainly illegal in public housing. It's illegal to have it in cars. It's illegal to have it in school. We have a criminal justice problem that we need to fix. Legalization doesn't do it. The number one drug for arrest, do you know what that is? The number one reason why people are arrested? Alcohol. That's legal. But wait a minute, it's legal, more people use it, more chance of arrest. DUI, 10 times as many people arrested for alcohol as cocaine. DUI, using the public, selling to kids. There's 3 categories, 2.5 million arrests a year. We don't get rid of arrests when we legalize. In fact, when we encourage use, it provides more, I think, actually dangerous settings for use. And we see that in Washington, D.C., real quick, huge increase in marijuana-related arrests. Those are almost all people of color. And that is since they kind of this weird grow and give thing where it's legal, but it's legal to grow but not to sell. But they've seen a big increase in arrests. So we have a criminal justice problem in this country. Legalization is not doing it.
I mean, so it's true, yes, you have, if you change the marijuana laws, to identify irreversible harm, like the big difference in Cato Supreme is I don't think that's a per se wrong, what Kevin basically does, that the increased use of marijuana is a per se.
You got closing statement, you get 7 minutes if you want.
Okay, yeah.
You got
I got that one.
you got if you want to go to the table, it's up to you.
I just at the very tail end there, sort of the specific debate here. This is not a debate about medical marijuana. This is a debate about why you should be able to use recreational marijuana. And one of the things that's surprising me throughout this is that Kevin has endorsed the fact that it's not bad if you smoke marijuana. That there's a small subset of people that he's concerned about, that he's punishing. You guys are and the majority of people who want to occasionally have a drink or occasionally use marijuana in some way, and then with these other people. I don't think that using a substance that alters your mind is not necessarily wrong. I'm not saying you should use all those substances. Again, I don't like drugs that much, but I counsel you to not use them that much. But if you want to go to a Grateful Dead concert and smoke marijuana and it increases how much you enjoy that concert, you should be able to do that. Like, that is a positive social benefit. This has to be thought of this way. Just like tailgating before the football game is a positive social benefit of alcohol. Right? If you think about how many things in our world revolve around alcohol, to the positive social benefit entirely, with the idea that there are harms to alcohol that are increased by legalization, such as cirrhosis of the liver and addiction rates and drug prices, all that being true. But letting people tailgate before the football game, letting people have glasses of wine before dinner or during dinner, right? The same is exactly true for marijuana. There's a really interesting thing that's happened more on sort of big marijuana and big tobacco and profits and all these things. I mean, it's all kind of a scare tactic, precautionary principle for a drug that's been legal and used for thousands and thousands of years safely, and no one's ever overdosed from marijuana. I can tell you a story with Kevin's story. I can tell you about this business that is creeping in to kids, that's creeping in and advertising you specifically, especially college students. And it's coming with all these flavors and I want to make sure that you drink it all the time. And it's telling you that it's safe
And we're not actually sure because we don't have 20-year studies on safety. That business is, of course, LaCroix. I mean, LaCroix is everywhere, right? LaCroix is marketing its product to you. LaCroix is trying to give you as many flavors as possible. LaCroix is by friends who are just drinking it constantly. We don't know what the long-term effects of drinking LaCroix for 20 years. All these things could be said the same, but LaCroix provides a benefit to society by giving people a drink, and marijuana businesses would do that too in a regime of legalization on that. So, thank you.
So I think the question was not so much about whether use is good or bad. The question that I understood was about the policy of legalization. And the policy of legalization is unbridled commercialization. The reason I think it's totally different than LaCroix is because LaCroix isn't directly related to car crashes. LaCroix isn't directly related to dropping out of school, mental illness, workplace accidents, etc. So I think, again, it's not hang gliding, it's not sparkling water. It's something that actually is brand new. It's not thousands of years. Yeah, cannabis is thousands of years old. 99.9% shatter isn't. That's about 10 years old, and we have no data on it in terms of what it does to the brain. 50% edible infusions, brand new. That's not thousands of years old. So if we're talking about, the hemp grown by our founding fathers, which had 0.01% THC, which is impossible to smoke, or if we were talking about, the cannabis that the Egyptians may have used, which was less than, you can't even register the amount of THC that would have been in that. That's one thing, and maybe we could agree on some of that stuff, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about something that's been, just like the tobacco industry did 130 years ago, taking the tobacco and doing everything it did to it to make it by far the most addictive substance we've ever had. Biggest public health crisis in our world ever is tobacco. 450,000 Americans die every year still. More people died of lung cancer this decade from tobacco than last decade. It takes a while for that to develop. That is what I'm worried about with something like marijuana. And if you're using it at a concert, actually, it does, it isn't that negative, because that one person abusing may be affecting 10 people who have to inhale that secondhand smoke who don't want to be around it. That one person who's using is affecting me on the road, and it's very different than just a lifestyle choice. If my kid's bus driver has a lifestyle choice, like sparkling water or whoever they sleep with in their bedroom, that doesn't affect the way that they drive a bus. But if they're waking and baking every day, actually it probably does, and it could affect them. And so these are fundamentally different things. We're talking about a product that has been genetically bred to be way higher in potency, because that is the way that you profit from this. And as a country, we've done a lot of great things. One thing that we've done is commercialize the hell out of everything, promote in an extreme way products and material, basically gain for a small number of profiteers. It has had good effects. Apple was an example, I think, of a good result from that kind of thinking. It's had very bad effects. Tobacco, and you could argue alcohol is an example of that. Now that it's in our hands, and it's really an amazing time in history, because you are actually joining something that has not come around, it does not come around more than once every century. That's the amazing thing about your vote in 15 days, is that now we can't decide about alcohol. Shit, that train has left the station. But we can decide about a future intoxicating substance, and one that you and your families, as you grow a family, have a family, as you interact with the society much more, as you compete on a global economic job environment where, let me tell you something, if you look at the rates of marijuana and drug use among the people who are competing for jobs, you cannot find rates of drug use in those populations anywhere near what we are currently experiencing because of the commercialization of marijuana and THC right now, and opiates kind of there. The opiate epidemic was driven by also the for-profit industry. So I'm not saying prohibition is the answer. I don't want to lock people up, but I think we can do better than basically what we're voting on in 2 weeks and what the discussion was here today, which is the legalization and commercialization of another toxin. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. This has been our biggest event in 10 years of programming. I want to thank Kevin and Trevor for being here. And I want to invite you to the reception downstairs. So let's give a round of applause to our speakers.